So we are joined by Darian from DigitalOcean, and I'm also here with my fellow Maverick Brent Weaver, and we are going to talk about what it takes to upgrade your website speed without actually touching the website too much. So this is going to be an interesting one. Before we dive into the presentation, I would love to go around the room and have us introduce ourselves. So Brent, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Brent Weaver, CEO and founder of UGurus, and also a Cloudways Maverick. Been helping out the Cloudways team on designing and promoting their agency partner program, and super excited to be here.
Love it. My name is Jan Koch. I run Virtual Summit Mastery. I'm also Cloudways Maverick. And the reason I'm jumping the gun before our valued guest Darian gets to talk is because Darian actually runs the presentation today. So I'll hand it over to you and we'll kick off the presentation once you finish the introduction.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jan. As Jan mentioned, my name is Darian. I'm a solutions engineer here at DigitalOcean. I've been with DO for about 5 years now, so I'm a dinosaur in tech terms at DO, and super excited to do this presentation with Jan and Brent here today. So let's get started. So obviously this is a joint presentation today between DigitalOcean and Cloudways. We wanted to talk about a couple of things because you can't just touch it from the infrastructure side, and you can't just deal with it from the software side. Both pieces are important. Pardon me. So let's get started. We're going to talk today about some tweaks from us geeks and try and achieve the fastest possible WordPress installation. This is something that has been the holy grail for everyone for quite a while now. WordPress is obviously a super popular content management system, and as a result, a lot of folks run on it. So we want to figure out, how do we improve that? How do we make it faster? How do we make it the best it can be?
I think we're not live, guys. I think something went wrong with the restream.
It says live in the upper left corner.
That's true. That's true. And Cloudways confirmed that restream is set up properly as well. We're not going live through StreamYard directly, but I don't see a notification on Facebook. So
okay.
Something somewhere went wrong, and I doubt that it's StreamYard, to be honest.
Technical difficulties. If anyone can see this stream, we're working on it. We'll figure it out.
Let me just double check the YouTube channel real quick to see. We should go live on YouTube as well.
I'm seeing us live on Facebook, guys.
That's good.
You are? Perfect.
Yeah.
I don't see anything. And Shams says we are not live either. It's showing up fine. Okay.
Well,
perfect.
hey, if Brent can see it, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
We've got it. We'll just pretend this little hiatus didn't happen. But great.
I'm glad we didn't go totally like behind the scenes in terms of like acting like we're in the green room again or something, guys. So
let's stop making sausage here. Great. So awesome. So we'll go ahead and move on. So we're going to talk about a few things today in this webinar. We're going to talk about one, does speed matter, right? And obviously intuitively we all think it does. We know that we want that page to load more quickly. But we'll talk about the actual numbers behind that. What does that look like statistically? And we're going to talk about some common WordPress bottlenecks. Specifically, we're going to focus on caching as one of the big bottlenecks and out-of-date software as one of the other big ones. Then we're going to talk about how hardware can help with those bottlenecks as well. And then we're going to put it all together and look at what those results look like, right? When we take all of the performance improvements, when we update all the software, when we have the newest versions of everything, and we have the hottest, freshest hardware, what can that do for your website overall? And then finally, we're going to talk about what that means to you and your customers. Awesome. So first of all, does speed matter? Let's take an example store, right? Now, this may not be reflective of your store and your agency, or your e-commerce platform, whatever it is. If we have an example of 1 million visitors and each of those visitors has an average order value, and your orders, when you get an order, I should say, is an average of about $45 per order. What does that look like in terms of conversion? Well, Cloudflare actually did a study on this and looking at website speed and how it affected conversion of visitors. And we had some interesting results. So if you look at that 1 million visitors, average order value of $45 when you get that conversion, this is what that looks like. At a 5.7 second or more load time, we see conversion rates of less than 0.6%, right? And so in our example here, that's about a $270,000 value, which sounds good, but it can be a lot better, right? If we look at the next step here, 4.2 seconds, we saw a little under a 1% conversion rate, and that's worth $450,000 of that big group of customers, right? Even faster at 3.3 second load time, we see a 1.5% conversion rate. And this is where it really starts to tick up. We see $657,000 in this example of those orders. And then finally, if we get up to under 2.4 seconds or less, that's where we see up to 2% conversion rates on those numbers. And this is just with speed, folks, right? This isn't different websites that they measured these on. They're the same websites, just with different levels of speed, and that affected the conversion significantly.
And to be honest, those numbers aren't really that fast. I mean, 4.2 seconds isn't really what I would consider a fast website.
Absolutely.
And one thing that I wanted to share here is I saw an interesting study from TechJury the other day on mobile internet usage, which I think is super relevant in this situation. When we're talking about fast websites, we don't just need to think about wired internet connections, but on mobile and 4G, 5G, and so on. And even with all the vaccinations and 5G signals going through the roof, we still need to consider mobile. So what I saw in that TechJury study is US adults spend more than 5 hours a day on their mobile phones, which is insane if you ask me. And then from those 5 hours, only 21 minutes are actually phone calls.
That's actually surprisingly high to me, Jan.
Yeah. But just imagine that 4.5 hours on browsing, social media and stuff like that. And mobile e-commerce sales are set to hit $3.56 trillion this year. That's almost half the market cap of gold, of the entire gold market. And even more surprising to me was like 35% of US consumers do all online shopping on their phone. I do a lot, but I don't do all online shopping on my phone. So if we are talking about speed and loading speed, the mobile usage, I think, is the biggest reason to invest in that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is that, you know, this isn't just how fast it loads for you, right? Every person can test their own website and see a specific loading time. But as Jan mentioned, when we're talking about the mobile market here, we're talking about all sorts of variants and signal and connection and quality of and bandwidth. So you want to optimize your site as much as possible, even past the point you think you need to, because you never know how they're accessing your website.
You know what those slow numbers seem to me? It's like, how many times have you purchased something where you've like had second guesses, like, should I buy this thing? You know, like and that really fast site is just giving you less time to second guess whether you're going to purchase this thing on, you know, some random influencer linked you to or whatever. Yeah. And so I think we all have been there where we purchase something because we just like, oh, this looks cool. We buy it right away. But if it's taking 5 or 6 seconds to load, I mean, just giving you some doubt, like, should I buy this thing? Right.
Yeah. We're in the age of instant gratification. Yeah, we're in the age of instant gratification, and that means if you're not loading up instantly, then people lose interest. So let's talk about what that means in terms of some other studies, right? We just look at the Cloudflare study, but there are other people who have done some studies around this. Obviously, this is a big deal, right? Conversion times and load times and things like that. Walmart did an interesting study. They found for every 1 second improvement in page load time, they increased their conversions by 2%. People were getting tired of the loading and leaving the page before they improved those load times. Cook increased their conversions by 7% by reducing their page load time by 0.85 seconds. And these may seem like small numbers, folks, but this is money you're leaving on the table if you're not improving your site's speed overall, right? This is very cheap ways to get more conversions for customers is to improve the performance of your website. You don't have to spend a bunch on design, on all this fancy stuff. If you just improve the performance, you can actually get great great results. Mobify, in fact, found that for each 100 milliseconds improvement on their homepage's load time, they got 1.11% increase in conversion. Again, seems like small numbers, but can be huge depending on the volume of your site, the traffic of your site.
Yeah,
and if you're
what you just. Sorry to interrupt. I love what you just said. All we need to do is, with what we're talking about here, you just need to spend a little money and upgrade your hosting, as we'll see in a bit. That's what we are alluding to. We are demonstrating how hosting helps with this stuff. But you just spend a little bit more money every month and you earn significantly more. Like, it's a multiplier effect. And that is what I think is so powerful with solid hosting and fast websites.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about what can we actually do here, right? We've seen the numbers, so I think, you know, we've presented a case here that speeding up your website can improve your conversion. So the question is, how do you speed up your website? Well, there are a few things, right? And we call them bottlenecks, right? And that's the typical language, and we like to think of bottlenecks as slowing things down, but honestly, WordPress, by its default installation, not super performant, right? It's got a lot of tools, a lot of useful stuff, but without adding some performance enhancements to it, it's a fundamentally kind of slow PHP application, right? So there are a lot of things you can do. Primarily today, we're going to talk about caching. We're going to talk about keeping your software up to date. And we're going to talk about the hardware differences and how those can affect how your site loads.
Yeah, 100%. And as I don't like to admit this, but you're totally right with that. WordPress in and of itself is quite slow compared to other website types and CMSs. But what even adds to this is how many bad plugins are out there. I mean, how many plugins are built with functionality in mind, but not with speed in mind? And one of the most popular examples for this, I think, is something like Contact Form 7 or WooCommerce. They embed their scripts and their style sheets and every other thing on all pages, no matter whether it's actually needed on those pages. So I don't understand how something like Contact Form 7 becomes so big if you just inject your JavaScript into every website, no matter whether the Contact Form 7 shortcode is actually used on that page or not. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. And let's not get into the mess that shared hosting can be. Let's not talk about outdated PHP versions. I've just the other day came across a website that was running on PHP 5.6 still. So that was a big dough. And then there's so many other things. Compressing images to make the website load quicker. Having too many elements on a page, especially when you're building these long-form sales pages. I have to admit, I've been working on one myself, but you need to lazy load the elements that aren't visible, that are not on the screen. And if you're not doing that, you're just creating way too many requests. And then WordPress is also really good at messing up the database, if we are honest, with post revisions, outdated transients and stuff like that. That needs to be cleaned up regularly. So there's definitely a lot to say about inherent slowness of WordPress.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton that we could dig into about all the slow aspects, and we're not gonna go too deep into the weeds here today in terms of, you know, what are all the little plugins you should be using. We're gonna talk in broad strokes, but let's get started talking about those broad strokes, right? So let's talk about caching first. This is one of the things that can, honestly, it's the quickest, easiest way to improve performance in most cases. Caching is all about moving those commonly accessed pieces of data into faster or closer storage, right? So there are three basic types of caching that we can use in the context of WordPress to improve performance. The first is page caching. This is when you load a page, we can actually store that loaded page in case another user needs to access that same page in the near future, right? And that's super useful. It means we don't have to recreate the page each time, right? So that's less load on PHP overall. We can talk about query caching, right? Query caching is where whenever we have a query goes to the database in the front of the database, it stores that query in the result. So if that exact same query comes in the near future, it doesn't have to run on the database. It can run on the cache instead. And that saves DB resources, saves wait time, saves a bunch of stuff. And then finally, one we're probably all familiar with is object caching, though you may know it as a CDN. This is where you use localities all around the world. So if somebody from Singapore loads your website, then we store assets like media files, like your videos, like things like that, close to Singapore, so that if anybody in that area accesses that site again, it loads much more quickly the second time.
Yeah, this is these three basic types of caching are, I would say, must-haves for most websites. CDN probably not so much if you have a very targeted, very local audience. You don't need a CDN that much, but page caching, query caching, I think is very important. And we all know that there are tons of plugins for WordPress who handle page caching. WP Rockets with Performance Pro, Cloudways Breeze, of course. There's also a case to be made that hosting should handle that level of caching, that there should be server-side caching as well, especially for database caching and object caching. What I just want to say is that while this all sounds super technical, I want to invite people, if you have any questions, first of all, share them with us in the comments. That's what we're here for, to answer your questions. But also don't let this overwhelm you, because those are all little pieces in a huge puzzle that we are putting together right here. And it will all make sense in the end. We have some comparisons prepared for various server setups and various types of caching, enabled and disabled. And then you will soon see why it is so important to have all these caches in place.
You know, Jan, that was going to be my question. You know, as an agency owner, how much of this should I be really already aware of versus how much of this kind of thing is the responsibility of the hosting company to help us make our sites faster, right? Is this something that my developers should be like fully understanding and be implementing on our sites, or is it just more of a choice of who we're hosting with?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think it is, I don't want to say 50-50. It's probably 70% on the host and 30% on your developer team. What I would say is your host needs to have a very strong caching in place in the first hand to serve the database quickly and to have server-side caching enabled. But then there's also some configurations that depend on each website. For example, with WooCommerce, you need to exclude certain pages and you need to exclude certain cookies from caching. The checkout page would be one example. My account usually gets excluded. The cart page usually gets excluded. Everything that's dynamic is hard to cache because you cannot generate these static copies of content. But then if you have a general portfolio page or a blog or just some sales pages and lead generation pages with a simple funnel, those can be cached entirely. And a plugin like Cloudways Breeze would be a good way to implement that.
Yeah, and that's a great call out, Brent, and something that we'll talk about more later in the presentation as well is how much managed hosting do you want, right? Because it's totally possible for you to stand up your own server in your basement, right? And that's totally an option. In that case, you're responsible for everything, right? Even the power and the network itself. Then you could go, infrastructure as a service provider, in which case you're still responsible for almost all of those pieces, the page caching, query caching, object caching. It's when you get into the more managed services that some of this stuff starts to be taken care of for you. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how much is my time worth, right? Is it worth it for me to spend a lot of time figuring out how to set this up myself, or do I want to trust an expert, a pro, someone who's done this thousands of times already?
I know which version I would do. So,
I know, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm even on the infrastructure side, and I know which version I would do, but we'll talk about that later.
But by the way, we have some question from Kevin from Denmark, and I want to give a shout out to Kevin, to Ling, and to Samuel from Denmark, US, and Brazil. So we're really doing it on a global scale right here. That is super exciting to see. Are we talking about CDNs too? Probably not so much in this presentation, Kevin. We're more talking about the hosting side of things. We'll be comparing the regular droplets from DigitalOcean against their premium droplets against the Cloudways optimized premium droplet. But if you have any questions about CDN specifically, leave them in the chat, please. And I'll make sure I'll forward them to the Cloudways team and we'll get them answered for you.
Yeah, and to be clear, the last bullet point here is definitely about object caching, right? Which is that CDN component. And like Jan said, we're not going to dig too deep into which CDN you should be using or what configurations or what cores settings you should have. That's all a bit more in the weeds than we want to get here. But definitely, CDN should be something you consider in terms of improving the performance of your site. It's one of the easiest ways to improve performance for sites that are really media file heavy, and especially ones that have a global audience. Great. One of the other big aspects that slows down a lot of WordPress sites, and it's insidious, it's hard to figure out sometimes why your site is running slowly, is out-of-date software. Like Jan was talking about earlier, having a PHP still on like 5.6, that's going to cause some problems, right? Not only are you going to be incompatible with some of the newer plugins, but fundamentally PHP and most applications improve their performance as they get updated, as they move up in versions. So we generally want to stay up on the latest version for all of this stuff, but there is quite a bit to consider, right? We're not talking about one or two pieces of software that you have to keep track of. We're talking about potentially dozens, right? We listed them all out, or we listed some of them out down at the bottom here, but I'm obviously not going to read through that whole list. And one of the big things about this is that not only are you sacrificing performance by not keeping your applications up to date, but you're also sacrificing security. Now, we're not going to, this presentation isn't about security, but nobody wants to wake up to find out that they're hosting a page that they weren't aware of, that's doing some insidious thing or phishing or something like that. So security is absolutely a critical piece of this, and obviously, if you've got an insecure site and somebody puts up a bunch of nasty stuff on your page, then you're going to lose conversions that way. I don't think we need to do a study for that.
So true. And on the other hand, again, similar to what question Brent raised on the slide before, and you have to pick whether you want to spend time with this or not. It's totally fine if you're like a sysadmin and you see all this stuff and you get excited about configuring and finding out the bottlenecks in your configuration files and stuff like that. That's super cool, and I wish I could do that. But first, I lack the skills, and second, I lack the time for this. So it is cool if you want to maintain this stuff yourself. You can just go with a regular droplet and just configure everything yourself. But if you are a business owner, chances are you don't have the time for this stuff. And Link's question ties in pretty nicely. Is it possible for the host to do 100% for optimizing speed? I wouldn't say 100%, but I would say 70%. I don't think a host can do everything because the websites are just too individual and too specific.
Yeah, and some of it comes down to, not just necessarily whether the host can do things, but whether you choose to make improvements to your site through the host, right? One of the things we'll talk about is the fact that Cloudways now offers two types of DigitalOcean droplets, right? The standard droplets and the premium droplets, which we're going to touch on a little bit later. And it's absolutely up to you whether or not you choose those premium droplets. So in that context, it is up to you, even though it's a hosting decision. It's up to you whether or not you take advantage of that additional speed.
Yeah, 100%.
So we come to the question of, okay, do I want more CPUs or do I want a few fast CPUs, right? So when we talk about premium droplets, what do we actually mean here, right? When we talk about premium droplets, we're talking about the newest CPUs in DigitalOcean's fleet, right? So we've got the higher clock speeds, we've got more burst clock, and they're using the newest architecture, right? So fundamentally they're faster CPUs, right? And we'll talk about how much faster later, but they're faster CPUs. So when we talk about
to phrase that, sorry, but let me take a step back real quick. With Cloudways, what you can do, you select your own server size, and if you don't know what server size you need, get in touch with their support, and they'll help you out by asking questions like how many visitors do you have per month, stuff like that. They'll help you determine what server size you need. But with that decision, you can decide between the standard and the premium droplets. And when you go to the pricing page on the Cloudways website, you'll see that they have different CPUs, they have different storage, they have different hard drives. And that is what we want to highlight here and give you the examples of when do you need more CPUs, when do you need fewer CPUs. Back to you, Darian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jan. And that's absolutely right, right? When do you want more of those slower CPUs and when do you want faster CPUs, and the number of them matters less. And so this is a little bit of a chart here. When we talk about this, we talk about generally single-threaded versus multi-threaded applications, right? A single-threaded application is something like Redis. Technically PHP as well is single-threaded, though it does spin up multiple processes, so it's a pseudo multi-threaded. But a single-threaded application like Redis can't take advantage of 16 CPUs. It can at most take advantage of like 2 or 3. It uses a cleanup process on one of the other CPUs. So when we look at performance for Redis, it absolutely benefits from faster CPUs. So if you're looking at, should I get 16 CPUs on the slower Droplet, or should I get 8 CPUs on the premium Droplet? Redis is going to perform, for example, better on that premium Droplet. However, multi-threaded applications can take full advantage of more CPUs. So there's a balance there to strike, right? When we think about what's going to give me the most advantage for my site. However, if you look at this graph, overall, fewer fast CPUs gets great or good performance on pretty much everything. More slow CPUs is going to give you good performance on those multi-threaded applications, but really poor performance on those single-threaded applications comparatively. So let's talk about the actual hardware here, right? What is the difference? There are two key differences between premium droplets and regular droplets. One of those we talked about, the CPUs. The other one I want to talk about is NVMe. So premium droplets on DigitalOcean use NVMe drives, which is a new driver, and it is much more performant than the previous old AHCI's driver, the /SATA driver, right? We typically think of those as SATA drives. And obviously there are a bunch of numbers on the right-hand side here, 64,000 command queues as opposed to 1, 64,000 commands per command queue as opposed to 32. 2.8 microseconds instead of 6. All these numbers are good, but they don't really mean, they don't translate directly to what does it mean to my site. What it means is, on the left-hand side here, is you use less CPU when you're writing or reading from disk. You have lower latency writing to and reading from disk, and you get more in IOPS, which is input output per second on that disk. Now, this is a boon to WordPress, absolutely.
Yeah, all of this is super important every time you are loading a website, because you always need to load the PHP files behind WordPress. You need to load images. You need to load stuff from the database that refers to files on the file system that it ends up being stored on the NVMe drive. So I think the short way of understanding this is NVMe is better than the left side.
Yes, NVMe is better than AHC. Absolutely, that's the fundamental summary, right? And when we talk about databases, obviously that's a huge performance impact. When we are using the database heavily, and that database is on that same disk, then it is, or SSD in this case, not a disk. It is critical that we eke out every bit of performance from that drive as possible.
There is a nice question coming in when we go back to Memcached versus Redis. Kevin said he often reads in forums that Redis doesn't work and it's not made for WordPress, but at the same time he reads the opposite. So there's a lot of conflicting information on this case. And from my perspective, I've used Redis very successfully with WordPress sites, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this stuff as well, Darian.
Yeah, I mean, and we see this a lot with wasn't made for this, right? But that's never stopped anyone from using a product successfully before, right? And that's just it, is that Redis was designed to be the fastest possible database, right? It's what we call a high performance database, which means it stores entirely in RAM, which is faster even than NVMe. And like Jan said, if you're looking for a fast way to store a key value pair, Redis is great. Memcached is good. I have nothing against Memcached. I think it comes down to, and this is like someone asking, what language do you code in, right? Do you code in Java? Do you prefer JavaScript? It's what you're comfortable with, right? Yeah, they all have slight performance benefits or something over the other, but it depends overall. What are you comfortable with? What do you like using? What are your reasons for using this over the other? And if you can come up with some good reasons, then use that product.
That's like asking, do you prefer Windows or Mac OS or Linux? It's almost a
Exactly.
religious debate at that level.
Yeah, tabs or spaces.
Are we having that
Oh.
conversation today, Jan? Are we diving into that, or are we gonna
Oh,
let
God.
Darian, you know?
Oh, God.
No, I don't want to confess that.
No worries, but that's it, but similar type of question, and that's kind of why we're talking about it like that, is that it really does come down to personal preference. A lot of these tools can be configured to use in whatever way you'd like, and it's down to what you prefer.
Yeah, and what's super cool, I'm just checking with my Cloudways stack on my server, is you can have memcached and Redis at the same server. So Cloudways found a way to make them play together nicely.
Yeah, Cloudways found a way to do a couple of things nicely, which is something we'll talk about later on in the presentation. But I've been overall very impressed with the Cloudways WordPress installation. So we've talked about kind of faster CPUs, what they impact, faster drives, how they affect things. But how does this impact WordPress directly, right? So there are a couple of key base tools in WordPress that benefit from faster CPUs and faster storage, right? So obviously on the faster CPU side, PHP, the core of WordPress, MySQL, Redis, Memcached, which can both be used at the same time, as Jan mentioned. Those all benefit significantly from faster CPUs. Not only because many of them are single-threaded or pseudo-multi-threaded, but also because they need speed when it comes to executing their transactions, and having faster CPUs gives you that speed. Obviously, on the right side here, MySQL benefits from faster storage more so than anything else, and MySQL is a core part of WordPress. I think everyone who's worked with WordPress knows that. If your MySQL installation is slow, then your site is slow. Fundamentally, that's a huge bottleneck, and giving it faster storage can reduce that wait time. So, what does this look like in practice? When the rubber meets the road, what can we expect to see in terms of performance differences between different types of installations? So we did 3 tests here. One, we did a basic droplet with a standard WordPress install. When I say standard, I mean just basically what comes straight out of the WordPress installation manual. You know, if you install it without doing any other fancy work on it, that's our basic droplet. Then we have a premium droplet with a standard WordPress install. So again, exact same image as that basic droplet, just put onto a premium droplet. And then we have a premium droplet with a Cloudways WordPress install. Now I should say, all of the content on all of these WordPress websites, they're all WooCommerce shops. Jan was kind enough to populate them with a bunch of placeholder data for me.
It's we went heavy with this test. So there is a way that you can generate test data in WooCommerce with a plugin called WP Cyclone and the WordPress CLI. And what we did is we tested 5,000 products, 2,500 customers, and 10,000 orders. 100,000 orders, I'm sorry. So we have stores with 100,000 orders and a couple of thousand customers and products, because we really wanted to know how WordPress and how the servers handle a big WordPress website. So take all the data we're about to show you with a grain of salt, and keep in mind that your site is probably reasonably smaller and will perform faster than what you are seeing right now.
Yeah, it's a great call out. Absolutely, everybody's site's gonna be different, but overall, the lessons that we see in place here today will affect your site significantly as well. And I should say we used primarily 2 tools for this. We used GTmetrix to determine kind of overall grading for the page, and then we used loader.io, which is a great tool for determining how much traffic your website can take on a given page. We tested the same page in all of these. We tested multiple different pages, but we just picked one page to give you some more interesting results. So this is our basic droplet with our standard WordPress installation. Now you can see we get a B from GTmetrix, which isn't bad. We have
theme, by the way, default WordPress, default
yes.
WooCommerce theme.
This is the default WooCommerce theme, but all of the products, like Jan mentioned, are in there. And almost 2 seconds for the largest paint operation. We had some blocking time where it couldn't actually do stuff. But I really want to draw your attention down to the graph on the bottom left here. because this is where we see the really interesting stuff. First of all, the blue line, that's our average time. So if you look at where the green line is at any given point and draw a line straight up or down, that's how long it took for that particular customer, the example customer, to load that page.
The green line goes from 0 to 250 clients or people visiting the page at the same time, by the way, over the course of 1 minute.
Exactly. And so you can see, some of you eagle-eyed folks may have noticed some weird things about this graph already, but we'll get to them. So I wanted to show you guys some of these breakpoints, right, that we talked about earlier, in terms of the conversion, right? So if we look at this first breakpoint, this is a 2.4 second conversion. We got to, not quite 50 people before we broke, or a little over 50 people actually before we broke that 2.4 second. So less than 50 concurrent users, and we're breaking that 2.4 second barrier, which is not ideal. Then we get the 1.5% conversion rate at that 3.4 second breakpoint. And again, you can see that blue line climbing up quickly. We're not getting many more users before we're seeing these conversion rates really hit the floor. And so all the way up at where we lose at 5.7 seconds, I believe, where we lose almost all of our conversion. We're only at about 60 users, maybe 70 users there concurrent at the site at one time.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that this graph drops off after that, right? And you're like, okay, well, maybe the performance improved. I assure you that's not what happened. Look at the right-hand side here. All of those plateaus you see in the graph, those are timeouts, right? Those are times when the server said, nope, I'm done. I can't take any more. Please, cried uncle.
It's simply not loading the page at that point. So the visitors are just seeing an error message. They don't even see the brand. They don't see the logo. They don't see the shop. The server just says, nope, you are the one too much.
It's not loading slowly. It's not loading at all, right? This is what we call the hug of death, right? If your site ever goes viral, then you're familiar with this, where eventually people just can't access the website.
And that's happening at 200 people?
Not even. Nope. This is happening at 70 people.
70 people.
Yeah, 70 concurrent users trying to load the same page at the same time, right? Which is not what you want to see, right? And that's why we talk about, right, this is a low performing WordPress, right? This is not where we want to be in terms of access. And if you look at the success and timeout numbers over there in the bottom right, 430 successes, 460 timeouts, more timeouts than successes in this test. If you look at where the blue line stops, it's about 150 users. We couldn't get past about 150 concurrent users with this test. And in fact, the test was aborted early because it reached its error threshold. The loader.io said, hey, this site, it's not working anymore. I'm not going to continue to test this. This is worthless.
And keep the number of not even 1,000 responses in mind. You'll be blown away in just 2 slides.
Yeah, Jan's giving spoilers over here, but he's absolutely right. So let's look at the next stage here, right? So what if we took the hardware and just changed the hardware out, right? What does that make in terms of a difference with the performance of this website? Now we still see spikes, right? We look at these breakpoints again. We still see that it's not ideal. We're at maybe 70 users again. We start to get past that 0.6% line. However, there is one big difference with this test, right? So while we didn't optimize the front end, we optimized the back end, right? So we gave it more horsepower that it could turn to. So even though it's not performing significantly better on the front end, if you look at that later part of the graph, we do actually get up to 250 concurrent users at one time on the page.
Yeah, and also what you see is the grades in GTmetrix have increased significantly without us touching anything on the website. And what's most important is there's no blocking time anymore. And the largest contentful paint is a full half a second. Oh, that's bad wording. It's half a second quicker than it was on the other website. So that's half a second less waiting time for your website visitors and more conversions, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see the structure, the grade for the structure was basically exactly the same because, like Jan said, we didn't change anything about the front part of the site. It went from 86% to 87%, which I think is just a measuring error on GTmetrix' part. But you look at, for instance, the average response time on the left here. I apologize. 9 seconds, right? throughout this whole test, we had a 9-second average response time. That's way above that 5.7-second threshold that we really want to stay under for those conversions. I don't need to tell you that we're losing more users when we have a 9-second load time on the site. So, but again, successful, right? The site was able to withstand the load. It didn't go down. It wasn't giving a significant number of errors, at least not nearly as significant as the last test we did. And this is just changing out the hardware, no optimizations at all. Now
that is just a premium droplet configured through DigitalOcean directly. So this is for people who like to configure their own stack, for sysadmins who like to fiddle around with server configurations. If you don't do anything like this, you get these results. But obviously, you can tweak these results to be fair against DigitalOcean. It's a great platform, and you can make a lot out of this. And how good you can configure this, we'll see on the next slide. So the first test we did had 1,000 response counts. This one has roughly 700. And now, Darian, let's show what Cloudways did with the premium droplet.
All right, we're building up to it. Here we go. Now, a couple of things to jump out right off the bat. First of all, the high grades on GTmetrix. We got a better grade for the structure, 99% of the performance. We gained another half a second in load time, right? We cut out another half a second in terms of waiting for that largest contentful paint. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the graphs at the bottom, right? And you look at this graph at first, and you're like, when I first saw it, I was like, the test broke, right? Something broke on the test, and we're seeing another one of those timeout, responses. No, actually, we ran the exact same test with the exact same content in the WordPress website, and these are the results that we got. And I want to draw your attention to the left-hand side in terms of the milliseconds. And the other one, we were seeing up to 1,500 millisecond wait times. This barely cracks half a second. In fact, our average response time for this test was 82 milliseconds in terms of page load. Not 9 seconds, 82 milliseconds, right? An order of magnitude faster. And if we look at the response counts, this is the crazy part, right? We were talking about 550 successful responses before, 150 timeouts. This is almost 92,000 successful responses and 0 timeouts in that entire test, which is a little mind-blowing to me, right? Not one timeout, nothing fell through the cracks in that whole test, really. So I was really impressed with this, and this speaks to how important those optimizations can be for your front end.
100%. And we have a good comment from Mike Davids Macaulay. He says, in a real world test, this hasn't been the case for me. He has 12 low traffic WordPress sites on a Cloudways premium 4 GB DigitalOcean droplet, and there is no speed difference for him. And I don't know what low traffic is for his standards, but he says that the premium droplet even surprisingly is slower than the non-premium 4 GB droplet. So there's an interesting case to be made here.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I'd love to see actual tests done, right? So, and that's why we thought that these tests were useful. Is that it's hard to tell, right? If you're just looking at it, it's hard to tell, hey, is this site loading a half a second faster than this one? Are these assets popping up a quarter second faster? We intuitively feel that stuff, but we can't measure it as easily. So I'd strongly encourage him to run these tests himself, use loader.io, use GTmetrix, and run a comparison. I think it's likely that the performance is probably slightly better on the premium droplet than it is on the standard.
Can I ask a quick question on the concurrent user count, just for if I'm out there selling this to a client so they understand kind of where they should be at? We mentioned 70 concurrent users. We kind of had the breakdown on the first example without the premium, 250 on the premium droplets, no changes to WordPress. What's the concurrent user like with this setup?
So this one maxed out at 250 again. Okay. But we didn't see the big difference there. We didn't want to no timeouts, no significant increase in wait time, and a lot of that is down to optimizations. And I should say, right, a lot of the optimization part that Cloudways handles And one of the reasons that you may not notice as significant a difference from standard to premium is that there are a lot of shortcuts you can take in terms of caching that cut out pieces of hardware, right? So in a lot of ways, Cloudways is trying to beat the hardware in the way that they optimize their sites, and that's awesome. It means that there's less difference between the different things that you're utilizing. But you can, it's essentially the difference between, I don't know if anybody's an F1 racing fan, but Lewis Hamilton, one of the greatest F1 drivers of today, you can put him in an F1 car, or you can put him in an ice cream truck, right? And Cloudways is Lewis Hamilton. They know how to drive it, right? But it depends on the engine that you give them, and they can do more depending on the engine that they get.
I love that analogy, because I had this impression of like the server stuff is like the engine, the parts, and then there's the WordPress install of like taking out all the non-essential stuff. It's like throwing out all the parts that's like weighing down the car, right? And that to me like makes sense, and probably would make sense to your clients of like, hey, we can have the lot of horsepower and we can really strip this thing down to the essentials.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's some very good comments, very good conversations going on right here. So Mike Davids McCauley again says he had never a problem with the non-premium 4GB DigitalOcean server, but when he upgraded to premium, the CPU usage shows a lot more somehow, and the sites do not load faster. So that might be the case for the sheet we had earlier, comparing the use case for more slow CPUs versus fewer fast CPUs. And there is also a comment from Nigel Hancock, who says that he's certainly seen site speed improvements since going to the DO droplets. So I think this conversation is just the proof of how individual this decision is, and that there's no one-size-fits-all recommendation or approach to choosing the right hosting, and it's all about finding the droplet and the host that works for your setup the best. Just to clarify here, our goal with this comparison was to showcase the importance of server-side optimization compared or combined with a solid droplet in the background powering it. We would have seen similar results with the standard DigitalOcean droplet as we are on this chart right now. Probably the GT metrics grade wouldn't be as high and the response times would be a bit slower, but the overall graph would be the same, with a spike until the cache builds up, and then we have a solid response time for the rest of the test. I just love seeing how many good comments we get and how engaged people are in this conversation.
Yeah, and it's a good question. And one of the ways I like to think about this is sort of a, we're like doctors in this context, kind of giving you guys a recommendation for, hey, you've got a headache, here's a medicine that we recommend for this headache, right? And for some people, for some websites, maybe your website is allergic to that medicine, right? Maybe it doesn't work as well on your website as it does on others because of the way your website operates or the way your customers are distributed around the world, things like that. And it could be that obviously on the back end, there can be bad neighbor effects going on. And when you change from a standard to a premium droplet, you may be getting on a different hypervisor that's busier at that time. But like Jan said, not a one-size-fits-all solution, absolutely, which is why, and again, we talked this a lot, talked about this a lot during this presentation. It's good to talk to the experts about this stuff. Because even if you don't have a one-size-fits, if there was a one-size-fits-all answer, we'd have no need for experts, right? Because then you'd just be able to look it up and apply it. The reason we have these experts and these customizations is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. And it's important that you examine what matters. And so I wanted to talk about kind of the differences between these, right? In terms of, we saw the performance differences, but I wanted to look at not only that, but cost. When we look at the basic droplet, that basic installation, that's $20 a month. For 20% more, you get the premium droplet just through DigitalOcean, and for a little over twice that cost, you get the premium droplet on Cloudways, right? And the reason this is important is that yes, that difference between that premium droplet on DigitalOcean and premium droplet on Cloudways, that's all expertise, right? That's what you're paying for when you do that. You're paying for the secret sauce that Cloudways has that allows them to crank out WordPress faster than anyone else. Certainly, this is the most performant WordPress installation I've seen. So I really like what they're doing, and I think that the premium is worth it if it's worth your time, right? And that's what you have to look at is, hey, is my time worth more than $26 a month to do this myself? For me, the answer is yes, my time is worth more than that. So I'll trust the experts, but it's a personal decision. It's absolutely up to you.
I feel like this is such an easy decision. Maybe I run our agencies a little bit differently than some people out there, but I think that, I mean, even thinking about page speed as a problem to just throw a little bit of money at the server and the hosting environment versus imagining somebody going through and having to go like page by page, install by install, and having to optimize the individual sites, like that to me feels like a really big project, whereas like pressing some buttons on the hosting environment seems like a really quick way to try to get some performance.
Yeah, I agree. One question that comes up here in the comments is DigitalOcean Premium compared to Vultr High Frequency, which I've just glanced over at the Cloudways pricing page. The specs are quite similar, and I would say in most cases, the difference will not be noticeable that much. There are people watching this. Mike Davids Macaulay says that Vultr outperforms way quicker than DigitalOcean for him. But I think the only way to really get this answered for oneself is to make a test and to compare them against. I think there is no point in us saying that DigitalOcean by default is better than Vultr, nor is Vultr HF by default better than DigitalOcean. You have to test this. And as Brent says, even running these tests and spending like a day migrating 10 websites over to 2 servers, comparing them side by side, is way cheaper than hiring a sysadmin who does this work all the time.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I love loader.io. I think it's a great tool to determine kind of what that load test looks like. And fundamentally, when you go for a cloud offering, you are having the specifics of the CPU abstracted away, right? So it could be that one CPU you test is an actual different model than the other one you test. And one of the reasons the DigitalOcean offered the premium offering is that the specifics of the architecture that you're getting. You can do either you can do an Intel premium droplet that's going to be on the most recent or the second most recent architecture, so you can get a consistent guaranteed performance with that. So yeah, what does this all mean to you? Right? We talked about a lot of stuff here. What is the actual impact on you and how you should run your website? And we've said it a few times, but if you expect high load on your site and want to stay online, you should be running tests on your infrastructure. Absolutely, right? And that's come up a couple of times. Run tests, test it, see what the tests look like. How do the tests perform? Right, and not just at the low end, but at the high end as well. What is your right? If you're just testing for your average day, then suddenly when you go viral, you're going to have a problem, right? So test. And if you are, again, if you're putting if you really want to be as fast as you can optimize all day, but fundamentally you want to run on faster hardware. You want to run on the fastest hardware available. NVMe drives, faster CPUs, newer model CPUs. Those are going to give you the best performance for your buck. And if your time is worth more than that, if your time is worth more than running a bunch of different optimizations and testing against them and seeing which ones perform better, if your time is worth more than that, there's nothing wrong with going with a managed offering. Swallow your pride. I promise once you use a really good managed offering like Cloudways WordPress, you'll not want to go back. It's addictive.
Yep, that's a fair point. And I think it's also worth noting that this presentation was mostly for agency owners and not so much for the technical folks, because if you are technical and if you love configuring servers, then why bother with Cloudways in any way, because you don't have root access in this situation. And that's not the point of Cloudways. So in that case, go with the blank servers from DigitalOcean and configure them yourself and geek out and enjoy the time configuring them. But as you both said, most of us are business owners, and our time is spent on more important stuff than configuring our architecture. We're better at the high level thinking, closing deals and stuff like that, rather than making sure that MySQL and Apache are on the most recent versions and tuned to the T.
Exactly.
You know, Jan, what I love too is a lot of agency owners that make speed their differentiating factor. I think a lot of them do have that heavy technical experience. And I think what this gives access to is the group of agencies where that's not currently part of their differentiating factors, but they can now start to make it part of their differentiation by leveraging the Cloudways team, leveraging the DigitalOcean's premium droplets.
Yeah, 100%. And let's keep running for a couple of minutes because there are still questions coming in the chat here on Facebook.
Great.
So this is very, very exciting to see, and I really want to make sure that we didn't miss any of the questions. Kevin, for example, asked, he is in Denmark and he wants to know whether he should choose a data center in London or Amsterdam if the traffic comes from Denmark. Is that even going to make a noticeable difference?
Yeah, so that's a very common question, and it could, right, is the answer. But
it depends.
Yeah, and that's why we'll go back to the same refrain we've had this whole time, which is you should test it. It's super simple to run a test from each data center, right? To just look at latency, look at how long it takes for those packets to traverse that distance. It's not always a straight line type of thing, right? A lot of times these packets have to go through a lot of rigmarole before they get to their end destination. They don't necessarily go just straight there. So it surprises me sometimes when I look at routes, how a destination, a data center that's actually farther away can be faster to reach by the network to reach that end user. So I'd strongly recommend you test it. There's actually a speed test application that DigitalOcean provides, which you can run on a local computer in whatever region it is that your users are. And you can test your connection to both Amsterdam and Frankfurt and London, all of those different places, to see what's faster.
That is very good to know. I'll bother you on adding the link later on in the comments so that we keep that tool at reference. There was also a question about a tutorial on load testing these websites and doing the test that we've done. I'll just plug myself right here because I have recorded a tutorial like this for loader.io a while ago. I just posted in the comments so that everybody who wants to can do the same test that we did, essentially. Yeah, so I think I'll just go through some other questions, and let me see if we've answered all of them. Zenda Greenfeld asked when to know whether switching to a premium droplet is worth it compared to a standard droplet. And then again, that is the it depends answer, I would say. Just worth testing, and you could easily clone the server, do a speed test. I think that shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, and you have the results for that.
Yeah, it's a question of do you need more performance is the first question, right? Are you seeing performance issues with your website? If you're not seeing performance issues and you're not worried about performance issues in the future, you're not worried about your site growing or something like that, then obviously that's the first stopper. Pardon me. But if you are seeing slowness or performance issues, or you're worried about that, then there are really two ways you can go. You can increase the size of the server, or you can go with a premium server, right? Now, the difference between those two is that I think we all know when you're talking about server sizes, we're not talking about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 CPUs. We're talking about 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 CPUs, right? So increasing the size of the number of CPUs you have can actually be quite a big jump in terms of cost, right? It can double your cost or more. But if you just need to eke out a little more performance from the CPUs that you have already, switching to premium droplets will allow you to only increase your cost by 20%. and it will give you that performance boost that may be just what you're looking for.
Yep, that's very helpful. On another very geeky question, Kevin asked about RAM. So he says that some themes or plugins require 700 megabyte memory limit. I haven't seen yet myself this big of a requirement, but certainly like 128 or 200 megabyte or something like that. There is a setting in Cloudways, and you can adjust that, Kevin. You can also set it via your WP config file if you want. But honestly, if you are going with Cloudways, I'd probably set it in the server settings so that all the pages on that server have the same limit. And then it's a question of grouping the pages, and all of them who need that limit should probably go on the same server in this situation. There's another question. You're just keeping them coming here. That is one of the most engaging webinars I've been on in quite a while. Paul Cass asked, when choosing clean, no Cloudways optimization when installing a WordPress app on Cloudways, does it mean Cloudways isn't optimized, or just that Breeze and other plugins will not be installed? Paul, I'm not familiar with that specific option. I'll look it up for you. I'll respond to that question after this webinar. My guess is that it's not so much the WordPress optimization, but the server stack optimization and the configuration of the server stack for WordPress specifically. And you'd probably just see a standard DigitalOcean droplet with Cloudways pre-installed in this case. Mike Davids McCauley, he has, Mike, you rock. Here's a good question. Will Cloudways ever offer servers that grow and contract with the needs in real time? Darian, is that technically possible with DigitalOcean?
I don't know how much I can talk about, but I certainly believe that Cloudways is looking into an offering that is auto scaling, right? And that's the term we use to describe that generally, is auto scale. That's the idea that when your server hits a certain threshold, it automatically either grows the size of the server itself or horizontally scales, meaning adds copies of the server that can handle that additional load. I don't know how much I can talk about it in terms of Cloudways plans for that, but certainly keep your eyes peeled, and there should be some interesting news at some point in the future.
It is so good to hear. And friends, keep the questions coming. We have to wrap up here by now, but keep the questions coming. We'll stay in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get all the questions answered. The Cloudways team is monitoring the chat. DigitalOcean is monitoring the chat. So you are in the best hands here. I would say that we close the live stream by now, and let's end up with our regular round of offering where people can get in touch with us. Darian, how do people best connect with you?
Yeah, you can reach me at dwilkin@digitalocean.com. That's my primary communication method for DO. Always happy to chat through that. I'm not really a social media guy, so I'll leave it to you guys to talk about your social media. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure my name is unique enough that it's not too hard to find.
Perfect. And Brent?
Yeah, if you want to connect with me, just right on the Facebook stream. I think I commented a couple of times, so just facebook.com/Brent Weaver. Shoot me a message. Also, love to give a shout out if you are interested in the agency partner program with Cloudways. Check it out at cloudways.com/agency or /en/agency. Working with tons of agency owners in that partner program right now. It's a lot of fun. Huge value add. If you're using Cloudways already, definitely check out the agency partner program.
Yep, I just leave that URL open because I wanted to pitch that as well. It's a fantastic way how Cloudways can help you scale your agency and add in value more than just making your website load fast. With me, again, I've been very active in the Facebook comments, and I'm also in the Cloudways users group. So hunt me down on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I am Jan Koch is the short version of my profile. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. We had a blast. I hope you learned a thing or two as well. And see you on the next webinar. Again, keep the questions coming. We've got them covered for you.